Gabriel, good to see you on the program. What realistic outcome should we have for this meeting?
Yeah, as we have heard, there's some expectation that we might get positive feedbacks from the meeting that Mr. President is going to be having with the Russian counterpart. Why do we expect some positive results? Because most of the countries from Africa, most of them abstained in voting, and they didn't want to side with any part of the conflict. So those kind of people, I think they are better positioned to mediate these kind of conflicts, because they didn't take sides since from the word go.
But ultimately, African countries are walking into this without much leverage, right? Because we're not parties to the conflict, but at the same time, we're not bringing any significant economic leverage to these negotiations. So in that sense, isn't it more likely that the status quo will remain?
Yeah, but we say we tried and we failed. We better try. I know that we don't have much stake, but we are part of the world that is harshly affected by this conflict. We are very far. We are not at the epicenter of the conflict, but we are heavily affected by this conflict. And it is in our very best interest to make sure that these guys come together on the table and sit and discuss their differences and settle down whatever that differences that they have in the past, and we move forward as a world, with peace, whereby production will be done equally, and some parts of Africa will, the food prices that we are experiencing right now might be reduced a little bit, because as we are speaking now with the cost of living in Africa is keep on increasing every now and then, simply because we depend too much on importation of grain products from Russia and Ukraine, especially wheat. So it is in the best interest of our leaders to make sure that these guys come together and discuss their differences and settle whatever differences that they have.
But isn't the rational thing here for us to do is to simply focus on the things that we can grow on the continent? 60% of the unused arable land in the world is right here in Africa. So whatever else the Europeans want to do, if they want to have wars on their territory, that's their problem. Shouldn't we be focusing instead on growing crops that we can actually help to meet the demand here, so we can swap over from being a net food importer to a net food exporter?
Yeah, you're very right. The demand for wheat, for example, in Africa is growing in a very fast pace. Why? Because urbanization is growing, the population in Africa is growing, and wheat is mostly consumed in urban areas. So we need to, no need of controlling population, that I'm not an advocate of that. But what we can do is that our area, Russia combined it with Ukraine, you find that most of the part of Russia is not weather friendly to cultivate wheat. You go to Ukraine, it's just part of Ukraine that cultivates wheat, but it feeds almost, it's a food basket of the world. It feeds the whole world with wheat. What about us? A country such as Tanzania has an arable land the size of the whole of Ukraine that is able to cultivate wheat, and it can be very well cultivated. So I think this is about time. I can call this as a blessing in disguise. Why? Because in times such as this one, this is when you realize that it is very important as a nation to become very self-sufficient when it comes to food production, because here food is security. Because as we are speaking now, some countries, there are a lot of riots as to the increase of bread prices and wheat prices, and some leaders have resigned, and some are being condemned to get out of powers. So those kind of stuff might spark a little bit of thinking in our leaders to make sure that we do our best to use the highest and best uses of our land, right, and make sure that we cultivate, because we do. So our farmers need just protection, having things such as forward contracts, hedging, and you know when you're going to the farm, you know exactly where you're going to sell your wheat and other products. If that is the case, even the educated youth might get into agribusiness, and the financial institution, especially these Bretton Woods institutions, such as the private arm of the World Bank and the IMF and the African Development Bank and the East African Development Bank. Most of these finances should focus on making sure that we become very self-sufficient, even if they will just try to act as guarantors of these commercial banks that we have in these countries, because most of the commercial banks look at these industry as a very risky industry, so they are very much afraid of investing anything in this kind of industry. So I think those guys who are big enough to take this risk, they should step ahead and take a risk and invest in it, because there's a lot of money in it. And I'm sure that even President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Desina, spoke one time, I think, in one of the meetings that he had, that the next billionaires will come from Africa, and they will come from solely the agriculture business.
Right, let me just move it along, because the crop side of the equation is one thing, but also key inputs like fertilizer, that's just as important. Africa is home to several oil and gas producers. Nigeria is in the top 10 as far as gas deposits are concerned, and gas is a key feedstock for the fertilizer industry, and yet we're net importers of fertilizer. What investments are needed to boost domestic fertilizer production so that countries here, like where you are, for example, in Tanzania, with lots of gas offshore, so that they can essentially produce the fertilizer needs, rather produce the fertilizer farmers here need on the continent, as opposed to importing it?
Yeah, it's just that it has been a very long time since we discovered our gas, and Nigeria have discovered their oil and gas as well. And things are moving ahead very well. I'm very positive about the possibility of having our own fertilizers produced locally in Africa. And one of the examples is Dangote. Dangote is just about to unveil the biggest fertilizer plant in the world, actually costing close to, I think, 30 billion USD. So we need such kind of investment, such kind of thinking in Africa, to make sure that we get rid of being net importers of fertilizers, while we have a lot of materials that can produce fertilizer locally. In Tanzania, we have a project, I think is coming in part of the press, that produces gas, that is Lindi. There's a company that is interested in investing in producing gas to fertilizer, and we have several others. So what I'm trying to say here is the readiness of the financial institutions and the thinking of our people, especially the business community, should be very keen in making sure that they take these risks and try to make sure that they invest in them. I know trading is easy. You make very easy money by trading, but investing in producing actual fertilizers might be very difficult to people who are used to trading. But it reaches a point whereby I think these African nations should put a lot of incentives to rule and make sure that these business people should even dare think of having such huge investments, which might be costing close to 20 billion USDs, and it should be they should feel safe investing in countries such as Tanzania and other African countries.
Right.
So things like consistency in policy making, like not changing policies. Like today, this president comes in and he comes with a lot of changes which affects investment. So people should feel safe of their capital that they want to invest in this sector, especially the agriculture and the fertilizer as well, because they are compatible to each other. So I think because the market is there and it's very big, and the materials are there, we have a lot of materials, but you find nobody's trying to think and invest in it. But we are very positive that in the very near future, people might dare and think and invest as well.